Welcome to the lecture for Psych 350 about the humanistic approach to understanding personality. Let's start off looking at the background of the theory. And again, not really a singular theory, but an approach that reflects a lot of similar theories or ideas of similar theorists. But where does it come from? Well, one thing we know is when it developed and became popular, it was really a reaction to the psychodynamic and behaviorist approaches. Right? And a lot of people felt, these other approaches are too pessimistic. Oh, people are bad. They're always just wanting to be violent and have sex all the time, or too deterministic. Oh, so if this happens, and this is going to happen, and there's no free will, there's nothing you can do. You're just determined. All consequences are determined by their antecedents. Some people were just fundamentally, philosophically uncomfortable with those ideas and didn't feel they reflected life as they knew it, and so that's kind of the ground that this approach grew out of, and taking advantage of knowledge largely in the area of philosophy, pulling a lot from the existentialists, people like Kierkegaard, who was big on examining the meaning of human experience. A lot of these humanistic theorists have looked at and continue to look at what does life mean, and what's the purpose of life in general, and of each person's life. What's the purpose of my life? Why am I here? Why are you here? Those kind of big fundamental questions. Another area that kind of contributed to this would be the realm of phenomenology. People like Jean-Paul Sartre, Edmund Husserl. These thinkers spent a lot of time trying to understand or describe the present experiences of an individual. So what's happening right now? Everything in awareness and in consciousness, what's going on, right? And much of this they attempted to do using mathematical terms, which I always find interesting. Moving on to some of the basics of this approach, and again, not a single unified theory, but some common tenets among people who identify as humanistic. There tends to be an emphasis on personal growth. Right? There tends to be this view that humans are generally geared toward growth, programmed, predestined, whatever. We're here and we're gonna grow. That's the natural course of things, is to grow. And there's an assumption here that's kind of inherent, that there's some potential self that you'll always be moving toward. But kind of like the mathematical concept of infinity, you can never reach it, but you could always move toward it. Right? And this true self, also another kind of assumption here, is that it has some sort of positive connotations. Right? We don't talk a lot about, somebody really needs to realize their full evilness, then they'll be fully actualized. Not so much. And so it tends to be, it's not just about being a better person, but there sure doesn't seem to be a positive connotation to it. And a lot of these early thinkers probably would argue that this growth is toward some divine model, right? To become fully human is to become godlike, right? Though not all thinkers shared that belief, but that was a kind of a common thing in their thinking. Another emphasis is on personal responsibility. Right? There's a recognition that multiple things influence what you want to do. Right? Even in extreme circumstances where somebody has a gun pointed at your head and says, "Okay, do this," or I pull the trigger, and the behaviors would say, "Oh well, then you do what they say. Otherwise, you die. So to escape that severe punishment, you'll do the thing. There's no choice involved." The humanists would say, "Yeah, you've got some strong motivation there, but ultimately you choose what to do, and you've got to be responsible for your choices." So if you're born into poverty, if you're born into wealth, whatever, if you're born to loving parents, if you're born to neglectful parents, right, you have these different circumstances that are going to push you in different directions and different things in your life, but ultimately You are personally, no one else but you are personally responsible for the choices you make. Another one is to focus on the here and now. Two things about this. One, that happiness comes from living in the moment, right? So not thinking about, don't worry about spending all your time dealing with regret from the past or worrying about the future. To be truly happy, you have to be in the moment and live in the present. A second thing with this that really helps distinguish it from psychodynamic is that the idea that your antecedents don't determine your future. So your childhood, your previous relationships, all those things, they're not kind of this blueprint is, okay, well, if all these things happened, then definitely 10 years from now, here's where you're going to be. Because again, there's that idea that you always, at every moment, have a choice to change direction in life, right? And kind of a consequence of that is, if you kind of apply this approach on towards therapy, which people do, is you don't need to understand or explore your past to have a better future or present, the present being even the most important. Because all you have to do is choose, what are you going to do right now? What are you going to feel right now? Last, an emphasis on the phenomenology of the individual. This is based on the idea that each person has a unique phenomenological field, right? So that's a unique set of experiences that is knowable fully only to him or herself. Right? So there's all kinds of experiences, sensations, perceptions, stimuli, thoughts, feelings, everything going on really in your brain, we know now. Only you know the totality of that. Right? People can kind of observe the world around you and make some guesses, maybe educated guesses about a lot of what's going on inside your head, but ultimately you know, you have access to know all of it, and you're the only person that does. And that's, again, important for how you're going to be interacting with individuals. Okay, moving on, talking about some of the key figures in this approach, one of which being Carl Rogers. And he wrote a lot about the fully functioning person. Right? So what do we mean by that? Well, one thing, it's not kind of this end point. It's not a goal, oh, I want to become fully functioning and then I'm done. Yay! No. Rogers said, no, there's no end point. It's a process that where you're geared toward growth, right? Where you're always moving toward becoming more fully functioning, not finished fully functioning. What does that mean to be more fully functioning? What are the characteristics? Well, as you move further along in that process, the idea is that it's associated with greater freedom of choice, right, which involves that acceptance of personal responsibility, an increasing focus on living for the moment, and there's that here and now, and then also greater creativity and more intensely felt emotions. So being fully yourself and fully alive and moving toward that. Again, it's not an endpoint, it's a process. Rogers also attached a great deal of importance to how individuals experience themselves. Right? Notice I didn't say how individuals think about themselves, because phenomenology is about more than your thoughts, feelings, everything. So how do you experience yourself? Now, the way the world, kind of out there, treats us, which would be your phenomenological field, isn't always consistent with how we see ourselves. Right? I see myself this way, but the world's treating me like I'm not that way. And Rogers' thinking was anxiety happens whenever there's incongruity between experience and self-concept that's threatening. And it's threatening at an unconscious level. So it's not like somebody acts like you're really shy, but hey, I'm not shy. Why are they doing that? Now you don't even know what's going on. There's unconscious levels, still kind of tied to psychodynamic Freud stuff here. There's this disjunction between how you see yourselves and how the world is treating you. And when that happens at an unconscious level, again, there's the idea that anxiety bubbles up and is the result. And also, again, kind of still hanging on to a bit of Freudian stuff, is Rogers argued that people deal with that via defense mechanisms. Right? Sounds familiar? Primarily denial and distortion. These things work in terms of reducing anxiety. I feel better. But they lead to an inauthentic experience of the world, right? Because what you do is, according to Rogers most often, is it's not, well, I'm going to deny what the world is saying. Not denial on that. It's, I'm going to deny my true self to be in line with how the world thinks I am or expects me to be. Right? That makes my anxiety go away. I feel better. I fit in. Yeah, I am the way they think I should be. Feel better. But now you're not being authentic, and you're moving away from being fully functional. It's kind of the opposite direction in that process. Beyond that, Rogers argued that disorganization can occur whenever that gap between how we see ourselves and that information we're getting from the world is too great for our defenses, and our defenses fail, and then extreme anxiety is experienced. And this is where Rogers might argue that you go beyond just kind of your regular neurotic anxiety and get to that level of pathology or mental disorder. Right? Although Rogers probably wouldn't use those terms. Last thing about Carl for now, in terms of where do these incongruous experiences come from? The world's treating us differently. Well, he argued that often they come in terms of these conditions of worth. Right? This is whenever we learn that certain behaviors or attitudes result in loving responses, initially from parents, right, and then later on others. So when I do this thing, they love me and smile and are happy. When I do these things, they withdraw or they frown or they look at me funny. Right? And that withdrawal of love. And we want love. It's incredibly rewarding. And so our self-concepts become distorted, and we deny parts of ourselves that are not accepted by others, right? Because we're trying to meet these conditions of worth. I am worthy of love if I am doing this, or if I am like this, if I am achieving this. And I'm not so much worthy if I'm doing these other things. Even though these other things may be really who you are. Right? Another big name in the field, Abraham Maslow. Most people are familiar with the hierarchy of needs. Right? So Maslow felt that human behavior was multiply influenced, but that these influences could be arranged in a hierarchy. Right? So, in terms of where things go on the hierarchy, it's not just about importance or value of a motivating factor in terms of what goes higher or lower. The idea is that those needs that are closer to the base will have greater sway, greater significance, the less they are fulfilled. Right? The needs higher up won't have much motivating power until the baser or lower needs are satisfied, or more satisfied. But it's not this simple, this, then this, then this, right? There's this kind of, there are simultaneous motivations going on all the time, right? So it's not a matter of one need met and then the next. All levels can be working at once. It's just the degree of influence of a particular need, and again, it's not 0%, 100%, somewhere on that continuum. The degree of influence will depend on the degree to which lower needs are met. Right? They don't need to be fully met before some other needs have some influence. Right? So if your basic needs for safety aren't fully met, your needs for connecting to people might still be important, but if you're really not safe, the building is crumbling around you. Okay, right now is not the time to worry about making friends at all. It has, right? So it's about, well, how much danger am I in? How satisfied am I with my peer relationships? How much have my self-esteem needs been met? Right. So it's a degree at each level. Is that need being met? Okay. The more it's met, the less influence it will have, and then the more likely you go up to the next level. Self-actualization is at the top of the hierarchy, right? And this is again reflecting that humanistic idea of there's this drive to be your true self. Right? Again, the assumption here is that the true self is this positive, creative being. Right? That ultimately, if we can take care of all this other stuff, we can get to the maybe more important on a philosophical level business of being fully self-actualized. Maslow's work also reflected a perspective that's become more popular in the past 20 years, termed positive psychology, right? And this is again a bit of a reaction to psychodynamic, where oh gee, what's wrong with you? Because it grew out of Freud working with these people who were ill, had this kind of hysteria, right? So positive psychology wants to look at the flip side, and instead of what's wrong with you, hey, what's good with you? So they wanted to study psychologically healthy people, right? So Maslow is really one of the big forerunners of today's positive psychology movement. In terms of how he did that, kind of early on, one thing in terms of his method was to develop a list of people that seemed to him to be self-actualized. So we had a little biased list here, true. And then he would look for commonalities. So obviously there's problems with this method from a scientific point of view, but the point here is that, well, that's a novel approach to think about. Instead of looking, okay, what are these case studies of people that have something wrong with them, let's look at case studies of people that seem to be doing okay, that seem to have their stuff figured out. Right? So for Maslow, what were the characteristics of these people? Well, they tended to accept themselves. They were, more so than others, free from cultural restraints when making decisions. Right? So they took personal responsibility. Hey, the world may see it this way, but here, I'm going to decide what to do based on what I think is right. They tended to be creative, and then they also frequently reported having these things which Maslow termed peak experiences. Right? So what are these peak experiences? For Maslow, they were transcendent experiences. So when you transcend, you go above the normal day-to-day experience, above your normal phenomenology. For some people, these peak experiences may be spiritual in nature, thinking about a greater connection or communion with some higher power or universal spirit or entity. For others, it's more just a moment of clarity, but definitely this kind of qualitatively different experience that seems to be above your normal everyday thinking and feeling. Okay, and that leads into a good kind of transition from Maslow into Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who's a modern humanist, big proponent of the newer positive psychology movement. And similar to the peak experiences, Csikszentmihalyi talked about optimal experiences. Right? And in his research, doing things like asking people to describe moments when they were truly happy. Okay? And he found commonalities. So doing this kind of qualitative research. And the term that he used for these optimal experiences was flow. Oh, they're experiencing flow. Right? And so this sense of flow is when there's high energy and intense concentration. So this isn't just relaxed and feeling good. This isn't, laying out by the lake and going, oh yeah, life is good. That's not flow. Flow for Csikszentmihalyi came mostly with work, where maybe you're writing, you're working on some sort of mathematical problem, you're painting, you're doing something, and maybe it's like some drudgery, and I'm getting through it, and then you really get into it, and then you have this kind of burst of energy and intense concentration, and you can accomplish a lot of things. And he called that flow. Excuse me. So a lot of these things, as I've said, seem to occur while working. Which means, like, really, your awesome experiences when you're really happy and feeling good. You're not playing, you're not partying, you're working. That doesn't make sense. Maybe, but it seems to often happen. That optimal experiences are more likely in a work context than at play. But it does depend on your approach to work. Someone with a mastery goal is more likely than one with a performance goal to experience these types of things in a work setting. In terms of everyday experiences, well, does this only happen when you're working and you got to be super focused? No. Csikszentmihalyi argue that these can be had in everyday experiences if we take responsibility. There's that personal responsibility. If we take responsibility for our decisions and not just follow the routine that we're supposed to follow. Right? So the idea that unplug from the matrix. The matrix being this system of, okay, I do this, then I do this, and I do this, and they're going to do this, and these people are going to do this, and we all have this understanding of how exactly it works. And if you're willing to break out of that and challenge these suppositions, you might be more open to flow experiences in everyday life. But you have to get out of that rut. Okay, now we've talked about some of the major theorists. Wanted to talk a little bit about person-centered therapy, which is one of the biggest contributions, one of the biggest outgrowths of the humanistic approach to personality. And this approach, sometimes called client-centered, sometimes called person-centered, depending on which book you're reading. The client is the expert on the client, right? And this comes directly from that idea of the phenomenology of the client. That even though, because in psychoanalysis, the analyst is the expert in the room and will tell you what things mean, right? Oh, you had the dream about this, and we look at my book. Okay, you dream about a pig. That means you want bacon, or whatever a pig means in your dream. I don't know. For a humanist, if a person, the client, is the only one who has full access to all the thoughts and feelings and experiences, the full phenomenological field of that client, well, then they're the expert. So you have to, one thing that means is you're going to be following their lead. So it often is a much less directive approach than other approaches to therapy. Another really important thing is that the client is responsible for change, which takes some pressure off the therapist, to be honest. But it's not. So it's not a matter of going out and saving people or fixing people, right? It's about giving people an opportunity to make changes, recognizing that it's not going to happen unless they choose to do so. That choice is so important. So what's the job of the therapist then? Well, they provide an environment. They provide an environment that's conducive to growth, conducive to therapeutic change. What does that environment look like? Well, three major features. One, unconditional positive regard. So when you're with the client, you think, okay, this person is a good person, they're doing the best they can with what they have, no matter what they say. No matter if they say something, oh, I had this thought that I wanted to drown my baby. You don't say, oh God, what a horrible person. You say, my goodness, how frustrated must you be to get to that point? Right? Those are two very different reactions, right? Because if you put these conditions of worth where I'm only going to be nice to you and talk to you if you say things that don't gross me out or offend my sensibilities, well, then people aren't going to be able to share very much. They're going to be guarded. If you can really have an unconditional positive regard, it's not that everything they say, whatever they do is fine. It's whatever they think, whatever they say, whatever they have done they are a person who's doing the best they can with what they've got. And there's this kind of belief that they want to be more. They want to grow. Right? And if you can hang on to that idea, then you can accept the person without accepting maybe some of the behaviors that they report. And you're going to be much less judgmental and more accepting. So your positive regard does not have conditions. It's not, I'm going to think of you as a person as long as you only say these things. It's unconditional. Also, empathy, right, which is not sympathy, and it's an act of empathy. So it's understanding this position of trying to understand what another person is feeling and thinking. So trying to get a view of their phenomenological field. And it's not that you have to have some sort of great psychic ability, some sort of gift to sense what they're feeling. You have to care enough about what they're feeling to try to find out. So you have to be communicating it. Oh, geez, what? God, I'm trying to figure out what that's like for you. And it seems like that would be really, really embarrassed about that, maybe. Right? So you're checking in with these thoughts and feelings and communicating that to the person. Know, hey, I'm trying to figure out what's going on with you. Am I right? And then you can work collaboratively, and they can bring you into their phenomenological field if you make that effort. The last thing, genuineness. So no artifice, no being fake. Also, not this clinical distance that's I'm the therapist, you are the patient. Right? You're a person in the room with them. And if they say something, I had a dream that I wanted to drown my baby. Right? And if your gut reaction is, oh my God, it's a horrible thing, you might have to say, wow, when you first said that, I had a really visceral reaction to it, and it made me feel these really strong feelings toward you. Right? So you have to balance that unconditional positive regard with the genuineness. So I had this feeling, but I also know that that's a thought you had. It's not something you've done. From what you told before, it's not something you'd ever want to do. Yada yada. But when you said that, I had this reaction. What's it like for you to hear me tell you that? All right, and we're going to process my genuine reaction to what you just said. So if you can do those three things, you create a therapeutic environment for change. And one of the interesting things about this approach, and a lot of this overlaps with Carl Rogers' approach to therapy, is he would argue that if you do these things in any relationship, not necessarily client-patient or client-therapist, with your loved ones, you're going to establish an environment that's conducive to growth. So these are things to try to aspire to in all relationships. Maybe. Okay. So this humanistic approach seems okay, not so much. And it's got its upsides, it's got its downsides, right? It definitely, for a lot of people, has an intuitive appeal, right? There's something that's very attractive about the idea that, oh yeah, we are all born, created, whatever you want to say, with this growth orientation, right? That's a very seductive idea, and it kind of makes sense to a lot of people. Another thing that's I think really attractive about this is the emphasis on healthy functioning. So it's not just, okay, what's wrong with people? Why are people so dirty and gross? It's no, what people that have their stuff figured out, that are doing well, that are connected and loving and present. What's going on with them? That's kind of an interesting thing to look at. In terms of some criticisms, empirical validation is much more difficult to come by. And it's not that the research for this approach they never find what they say they're going to find. It's not so much that, it's that a lot of the concepts aren't very well defined, which makes it difficult to study empirically, right? How are you going to study free will it's tricky. Purpose in life, very complicated things to study because they're fairly ill-defined, diffuse concepts. So, not that they are empirically invalid, they just don't have the same level of empirical support that things that are very easy to operationalize, like behaviors in a behavioristic approach. Very easy to look at classical conditioning, operative conditioning, those things, and study that in a lab setting. Not so much with this approach. One of the other things doesn't have much to say for your more severe psychopathology. So those individuals suffering from schizophrenia and kind of psychotic breaks, really profound mood disorders, humanistic psychology, some people would argue, doesn't apply as well to those. It seems to apply more to people that are in that range of normal human struggling and frailties. Once you get 2 variations beyond the mean, you get out there, well, this person had some experiences that only 5% of the population has these experiences, about hallucinations, delusions, manic episodes. What would the humanists say about that? And they're a bit silent. Okay, that's all for now. Take care.